Hey everyone, how's it going? Ah, quick check-in because there is research on Wednesdays and then bookended with private practice and then hospice Friday. So I am out in the field. There's a few things I wanted to put out there for the first paper, so it's not due until tomorrow. But finishing up chapter two and the second half of it, getting over social work, social welfare, we were on the empowerment process. Um, in empowerment, it's the process of increasing power, interpersonal, political, and then also personal. So, this is one of the things that comes up in chapter two. There's a dual focus on psychological control and then socio-political change. And so social workers do get involved when they see injustice issues, um, often starting with the basic needs and then spreading out to discrimination and things of that nature. That's when we get involved. So empowerment in social work, we often again focus on the strengths. Social workers are known to work collaboratively, so it doesn't have to be just one person working on it. And then critically reflect on structural arrangements and sometimes link personal and political power. So those are the pieces on chapter two that I wanted to get into that we have here. Let me make sure I have. Chapter 10. So there was also a Chris Martenson video I wanted to bring your attention to. And he's kind of getting into some of these injustice issues, talking about even possible social unrest and things of that nature. Um, and then stuff in Europe. So this is
things just went from bad to worse in Europe, and it's coming soon to a theater near you. I'm talking about the banning of Russian oil. Hello everyone, Dr. Chris Martenson here with another episode 63. By the way, really important stuff going on right now. As you know, I've been talking about COVID, I talk about energy markets, I talk about markets, financial markets that is. I talk about it all because they're all interconnected events. So we have to talk about these things. I think that what just happened in Europe in the banning of Russian oil is going to have extraordinary, huge impacts. And of course, that comes to us courtesy of politicians who are mainly unserious people in the sense that they've never seriously been responsible for the production of anything. They don't really understand how things work, but man, they're glad to legislate it and regulate it. Of course, they're going to do what's right from a political standpoint, which increasingly is wrong from an environmental standpoint, increasingly wrong from an energy standpoint, increasingly wrong from an economic standpoint. So let's go there. Let's take a look at these slides. I think that cutting off its own energy, this is not too strong of a term. Europe's self-destruction. This is what they're doing. They are self-destroying their economy, their people, their households. If you're one of my European listeners, please, you have to get ready. If you're listening from somewhere else, you might have to get ready just a little sooner or a little later than Europe, because this is the new normal of what we live in. We have leadership that does not understand what it does. So today we're going to be talking about oil markets, how it functions. This is critical knowledge for you to understand. Now, it all begins here with this news that just came out on the 30th of May, and today is the 31st of May. So this came out on Memorial Day in the United States, just in EU, to impose an embargo on Russian oil. So more than 2/3 of imports are going to be cut immediately. And as if that wasn't enough, well, a little addition, a little something on top of that. More. In addition, Sberbank, Russia's largest bank, will be cut from the SWIFT payment system. So you can clearly see that Europe is very pushing hard to put a lot of pressure on Russia And of course, is this going to work? Is it not working? We've been fed a lot of stories about how badly things are going in Ukraine for Russia. Clearly, we've had a change of heart in that, seeing the newspaper articles come out of late saying, oh, yeah, well, Russia may have taken some losses, but they're also inflicting some losses as well. It's a little bit more even Steven than perhaps you've been led to believe if you've just been following mainstream Western news sources. Here, I got to be honest, we're not doing a really good job of telling ourselves the stories that we need to be told. We need more honesty, more reality. So let's start in with the stories. Obviously, here's a headline. EU leaders agree to ban 90% of Russian oil by the end of 2022. Talk about what that means and how they get there. In a big bid to punish Moscow, EU bans most Russia oil imports. Quote, European Union leaders have agreed in principle to cut 90% of oil imports from Russia by the end of this year, that's 2022, cutting off a vital source of funding for Moscow's invasion of Ukraine after reaching a compromise deal with Hungary. The 27-nation organization has spent weeks haggling over a complete ban on Russian oil, but encountered stubborn resistance from Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who said the embargo would destroy his country's economy, end quote. Viktor Orban, a little prediction time here, he's a very populist leader of Hungary, got swept in, although polls said it wasn't going to happen, it did. So there's been a big war against populism, obviously. The truckers in Canada, they just got squashed ruthlessly, mostly in the press, but also by a number of politicians. And then, of course, they're interested foot soldiers out there in the population who increasingly also seem to be the same people who are very interested, for whatever reason, in increasing totalitarian control over society, right? Less freedom, more surveillance, less personal choice, up to and including what goes in your body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a cohort of people out there interested in going down that route. I'm not. I'll tell you why, because that route does not increase prosperity. It always limits prosperity. So the mistake is thinking, I'm going to give up a little bit of my liberty for a little extra safety. And of course, you get neither liberty nor safety in all of that. And so this Viktor Orban is going to get in a bunch of trouble because he's daring to put the people of his country first. That's a no-no in the current political environment in Europe. All right, remember, the reason we like to know these things is because if you know where the shocks are coming from, you have a chance to respond and respond intelligently and maybe even improve your current situation, not have it degraded. Otherwise, if you don't know where the shocks are coming from, well, now they're just shocks. You're just a rat in a cage. Next thing you know, you find yourself pointing your finger at inappropriate parties at the street level for the discomfort you're experiencing. And that's not how it should be. Once you understand that we live in a circumstance, we all live in a cage. I live in the same cage that you live in. We're all going to continue to be shocked. Between here and 2030, there's going to be a very long series of shocks. Now, I'm going to go into a lot of what that actually means and how I'm responding in part 2 of this, which you can find at peakprosperity.com if you join up there and become a subscriber. We'll go into the details around exactly how should you be responding, particularly in Europe. I mean, this is, I'll tell you, you got to get ready. You got to be prepared for much higher food prices, much higher energy prices, a much lower level of economic output, and unfortunately, you have to prepare for the unpreparable, which is the kinds of things that happen when you starve a complex economy for energy are inherently unpredictable. They are instead emergent properties of a new lower state of energy throughput within that system. This, I believe, is a current, well, let's call it, it's our current predicament, but it's actually a permanent predicament. Nothing ever goes to heck in a straight line. There'll be some bumps and wiggles along the way, but this is our new condition where we're going to experience less and less and less available energy, net energy per capita. That has huge impacts on how we structure ourselves, how we organize ourselves, what happens, what doesn't happen in our economy. But again, our economy is not a set of dials and levers that have knowable outcomes. It's a complex system itself hinged on top of an even more complex system, which is humans and our social and cultural values and mores. Those are unpredictable how they will respond to the new conditions. So new conditions coming. Let's go here now. We're listening here to Mika's interview with President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Right, let's tee that up and give a listen here.
Well, what we also always have to do is find the right balance between not hurting our economy too much, because this is the strongest leverage we have against this Russian aggression, Putin's aggression. And I take the example of oil. Where we have to be careful is that if we would completely cut immediately, as of today, off the oil, he might be able to take the oil that he does not sell to the European Union to the world market, where the prices will increase, and sell it for more, and thus fill his war chest. So we have to be very strategic in the way we approach that topic. And therefore, it is also so important that we convene the rest of the world to really make sure that we deplete his war chest.
So a full embargo would really be years away.
Over time, what we do is get rid of the overall dependency of Russian fossil fuels, all three of them, and never to go back.
That was last week. Obviously, something changed between last week and this week, but if I go to translate what she said, Ursula said, look, if we don't buy Russia's oil, we'll just sell it to somebody else for even more. So the way we starve Russia for the capital is we buy it, but we're buying it for less. Okay, this is not how oil markets work at all. It's a very fungible product. It's sold all over the world. It's not like because the EU is buying it for X, maybe Russia will sell it for X plus Y to somebody else. It really doesn't work that way, or hasn't for a long time. Maybe in the near future it will work that way. I don't know. Maybe it will be a premium on Russian oil that some people will be willing to pay. But that's part one. Ursula just doesn't seem to understand how the oil markets actually work. Part two is this other idea, say, well, oil's just oil, so maybe we could just get rid of Russian oil at some point in the future. We'll use it. I'm going to talk to you about how oil is actually consumed within the system of refining and show you that it's actually not that simple. This is a cartoonish version, which is kind of like saying, oh, well, you go to the zoo and they feed animals animal food. So if the zebras run out, we'll just feed them some lion food and vice versa. It really doesn't work that way. It's cartoonish to think there's animal food. It's certainly a classification, but beneath that, there's some important distinctions between the types of animal food. Hopefully we would know that. If you have a hamster, you're probably not going to be feeding it too long on your cat food and vice versa. So at any rate, I think this was a really ignorant set of statements to be said, but it turned out that they didn't even last a week, because where she said, she was put on the spot, like, does this mean you're going to eventually ban Russian oil? No, yeah, maybe someday, Well, it just happened. So 2/3 gets cut right away. The remaining 10% is up to that 90% is going to be temporarily exempt from sanctions, so that Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, which are all connected to the southern leg of the pipeline, a pipeline that's been coming out of Russia for decades, continue to have access to fuel they cannot easily replace. Quote, Russia has chosen to continue its war in Ukraine. Tonight, as Europeans, united and in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, we are taking new decisive sanctions. That's from French President Emmanuel Macron. Of course, he tweeted that. Quote, the compromise means other measures can also take effect, including the disconnecting of Russia's biggest bank, Sberbank, from the global SWIFT system, banning 3 state broadcasters, so can't even have your stuff over here, can't even hear the message, and blacklisting individuals blamed for war crimes. So the normal way that it works across Western countries is the idea of guilt, innocent until proven guilty. Here, they've been blamed for war crimes. That's the way it's going to go. And so this is clearly being framed as if it's a global, all civilized people agree, but it's not true. About 15% of the world's population is on this bandwagon, and another 85% kind of aren't. There's a lot of countries that have not blocked Russia, banned Russia, all that. So this is just Europe with a lot of product from the United States blocking itself from access to Russian oil. So you think, oh, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? I'll show you what the big deal here is. So let's get there. I'll make this just a little bigger, get my drawing tool out. Take that off. So we'll just make this a little bigger, pull this down so I can read it more easily. and you can read it more easily. Quote, Russia is also not shying away from withholding its energy supplies despite the economic damage it could suffer as a result. Russian energy giant Gazprom said it cut natural gas supplies to Dutch trader GasTerra on Tuesday, a move announced before the embargo was agreed. It already turned the taps off to Bulgaria, Poland, and Finland. Is considering doing the same to Denmark. GasTerra said homes would not be hit as it had bought gas elsewhere in anticipation of a shutoff. There's going to be a little bit of this jockeying around, but this is gas too, natural gas. I mean, obviously for US people, when I say gas, I always mean natural gas. Gasoline is gasoline. All right, so this is a pretty big deal because as we look at where obviously this gas comes from, and we've talked about this extensively in the past, this isn't just the oil that is now embargoed from Russia, but it's the gas too. You can see here the places that have already been cut off from that, which they mentioned Finland, and we just had a little cutoff to a place in Denmark, and where else? At any rate, you can see here all of these in the pinkish color here. These are all already get 100% of their natural gas from Russia. These lighter colors get some lesser amounts on down to zero in Spain, because a lot of their gas actually comes from across here from Algeria. So at any rate, a lot of gas dependency in Europe. If Russia suddenly cuts off the gas to Europe, Europe is really, really, really in a dark place, literally, and a cold place, literally. Those two things, it's going to be an extraordinary economic disaster, and you put that on top of the monetary disaster that the ECB has already inflicted across the European continent. It's astonishing just how bad that's been. We'll have to talk about that some more at some other point, but carrying on here. So look at the European natural gas supply, see where it comes from. All of this stuff down here in the darker brown, this comes from Russia. This is an enormous amount. That's part one to take away from this. And part two is, notice how domestic production in the EU has just been declining year over year over year over year. And that's a normal thing that happens with any fossil fuel well, a gas well or an oil well.
All right, so I wanted to jump into this about the gas, again, looking at things from a holistic standpoint. I wanted to get into it because we're talking about advocacy and the different challenges that come up with social work. And these are some of them. These are some of the social work challenges we see, because in the long view, a lot of these come up and will make it really hard to get food. And that's where we see food prices really are going up, because to grow the food, we see tractors that harvest the food and trailers and things of that nature challenging us. And that's why it's something that we want to keep in mind, because a lot of these places we grow food and then ship it to, like I live in Ohio, we do grow a lot of corn and soybeans here, but a lot of the stuff that we have on our table is like fruits and vegetables. And there's a couple stories out about gas supply being extremely low this year, sometime in the summer. So something that we saw with Russia is that they do produce a lot of the wheat and grains, and then also the fertilizers. So what we're going to see with those challenges is that different fertilizers make it more challenging to grow the food at the yields that we've had in the past. So That's one of the scary things that we have. It's definitely not going to be easier. So ultimately, like as social workers, we would help our clients plan for this. We would help our clients get ready for some of these challenges, whether it is starting a garden that we had mentioned before, whether it is um, growing your own food, doing different things to capture your own water, even like rainwater catchment, um, even being less dependent on different energies, because that's what's going to cost the most for a lot of us. And um, then shipping the food is one of the scary places we would have to go. So if you stick around local and connect with local folks, it's going to be helpful. It's going to be ways we can prepare, also becoming more energy efficient. That's one of the ways we prepare, and making sure that we are mindful about consumption and about waste and about different things that we do. It does seem like a tougher way to live, but if we prepare for it now, it won't hit to us as a shock in the future. And then as a social worker, that's how we'll enter in with our clients. It's going to be important to do that stuff, um, and prepare. So I'm getting into opening chapter 3 and chapter 4, as we'll hit that one next week. We need to do about 1.5 a week. So finish with 3 this week. The end of social work and social systems. That's chapter 3 in Dubois and Miley. I did put the rest of the video, if that's something you're interested in. Like, this guy has been ahead of the news on a lot of that stuff for the past 10 or 15 years now. So definitely worth a listen. So that was a brief introduction to our ecosystems perspective. So looking at things from a holistic perspective, you'll hear this theme over and over in all social work classes, how everything is interconnected. So in chapter 3, they start with social systems. So we have both subsystems and the environments that they're contained in, little neighborhoods you might be in, within the city that you're in. I heard today a lot of drought problems in California have caused water restrictions. So different things there. So from the ecological perspective, we look at things from person in their environment, and the goodness of fit. So what were you brought up with? What type of neighborhood did you grow up in? How were you raised by parents or grandparents or adopted, and how did that affect you? So this is the chart in the book, but you have processing, like organize, analyze, synthesize, over to the outputs on outcomes of energy exchange, attitudes, behaviors, role, and performance. Also energy and information exported to component and environmental systems. Then a feedback response, either evaluation or adjustment. When I see that there's going to be more expensive food into the future, I do stock up on some of the things we'll need, like a winter's worth of food, things of that nature. Then back to, again, input, energy movement in the system, energy information, resources and opportunities available to the system. So if I'm not prepared in that sense, I will pay a lot more for food next month, and it will drain my resources for fuel or car or, spending money in the future, which is a big economy thing that may be coming within the next year or two. So human system transactions, we have the input, the processing, the output, and then the feedback. So if we stay ahead of the curve and can foresee what is needed, we can serve our clients better. Also preparing for the future. If we serve ourselves well, so that we're at least covered on the basic needs of food, water, shelter, we can then teach our clients how to do that, and teach social work clients how to So some of the implications of social systems for social work, we have regard for the environmental context of human functioning. We also consider problems and solutions inside of multiple systems. So we don't just all of a sudden next month say, we got a homeless client coming to us and we're like, we only look at the homelessness. We look at how it started. Maybe it was inflation. Maybe it was COVID job layoffs. Maybe it was the food shortages or droughts in the area, so they moved and the housing prices were too expensive in their next area. We also understand change in one system affects interrelated systems. So as he was talking about, even the oil prices in Europe, that's a global price. So oil will then become more expensive over here. Also social functioning, how people perform roles and functions in society. So the types effective, at risk, and people that have difficulties in functioning. We consider all of those. Also, environmental press and stress. So stressors create barriers and problems in social functioning. So some examples are poverty, poor health, inadequate education, and then architectural barriers. So getting into looking at the holistic challenges again. Then we have environmental press and stress. There's environmental enrichments that augment social functioning and enhance well-being. So some examples here are like adequate housing, job opportunities. I know that we're getting up upon a shortage of housing in the United States, at least affordable housing. And then access to healthcare. We've kind of worked on that in the past 10 years, but it seems like there still is some work. And the work that was done increased some healthcare prices, so it's made it harder for some also. So looking at that whole system analysis. So if you're a social worker, you might do a micro level social work intervention. And that could be work with individuals or even families and small groups. So when we work with them, instead of like advocating legislators and lobbyists, which is macro level. When the micro level, some of the issues we would be presented with might be personal adjustment. As a social worker, I diagnose adjustment disorder frequently because it might be a divorce, it might be a move, a school change, a job loss. So you're adjusting. It's a diagnosis that is good for 6 months. And you're helping them deal with that adjustment. Also, interpersonal relationships. Sometimes you'll do couples counseling. Sometimes you'll work with families that are learning how to deal with those interpersonal relationships. Maybe one of them has an addiction problem. Maybe one of them has a gambling problem. It affects the money of the whole household. And also environmental stresses. So I feel like that's where some of these food changes, they talk about climate change. There's actually a lot of research on a grand solar minimum, so a bit of extreme temperatures, but extreme cooling and harder to grow food, less strong sun. So food's more expensive because it's less available. That's an environmental stressor. Oil being depleted, as he mentioned. You don't just make new oil the next day. Further on in the video, he talks about even, I have solar panels and I own a geothermal system, an electric car. But he says even those things take a lot of fossil fuels to create in the first place. So here's what a social work intervention looks like, and we'll get more into this on Friday. But oftentimes you're cutting across all of the systems that a person is exposed to. So you have the individual, which is the dead center, but they're affected by members and families of groups. You then have even formal groups. After that, complex organizations. You also have communities and society and maybe the overall federal government. So things to consider there, that you want this intervention to cut across all of those areas, looking at and taking into consideration all of the challenges an individual will face from them. So you'll see as we continue on, I get into holistic approaches to things, considering the climate and energy, how it affects it, food production, security, and things of that nature. So I look forward to reading your all's papers tomorrow, and we'll see you on Friday.